firstly, it's really lovely to see so many of you here today. My name is Michelle. I'm Group Head of Marketing here at Hire. First and foremost, I'd really like to thank Brittany for the time she's taken to prepare the webinar and for sharing her expertise on a topic I know is of interest to so many. A bit of background. So Brittany is a recruitment and HR leader with over a decade of experience. She started her career as a clinical therapist before kind of navigating her own career transition into recruitment before joining L'Oreal in 2017. And then at L'Oreal, Brittany managed various recruitment functions, which included digital marketing, supply chain, before ultimately moving into a leadership role, to focus on university relations and early career recruitment, which is why we're here today. So today, she is head of people and culture at Her Campus Media, a 360 marketing solutions agency focused on Gen Z marketing and media. She also coaches professionals in their career. Brittany was named Teal's top 2023 career coach to follow on LinkedIn and has spoken at various professional events such as TA Week in 2023 in San Diego. In this webinar, we're going to take a deep dive into Gen Z and what they're truly looking for, and from the initial job search and description, so through to benefits and compensation, and importantly, how to generate candidate buy-in and loyalty post-offer. So super briefly, please submit your questions via the chat as we're going through. We'll host a Q&A at the end where Brittany will answer as many as she can. And so without any further ado, I will hand over to Brittany.
Thank you, Michelle. It's so good to see you all here. I want to encourage everybody to put comments or questions in the chat. I really want to make this interactive for everyone. So if there's a point or data point that you want to hear more about, please let me know. Otherwise, we're going to jump in. So again, so excited to be here today. This has been my background over the last really several years, and every day of my job right now is working with Gen Z. So a lot to talk through today. I broke up the webinar into really two categories. So attraction, if you're on the talent, recruitment, or HR side, this is going to be you. Or if you're even part of the business, it's really important that you understand how to attract Gen Z. I'm going to walk you through some strategies and actually like hands-on actions to do that, and things that I've done for my background or things that I suggest you do. Then we're going to talk about retention. Once you get Gen Z in the door and on your team, how do you keep them? It's really important to understand retention so you're not constantly refilling that talent bucket year after year. And then again, we're going to move to Q&A. So the first thing I like to start any type of webinar in is data. Data is so important, and I know you all are looking at data many points of your day. So I just grabbed 4 pieces of data that really stood out to me for Gen Z. And the first is 60% of Gen Z is worried about having their application stand out, which means that they also feel overwhelmed. So we're thinking about how to attract them, but really they are very overwhelmed with their resume or pitch decks, or CVs, and understanding how do they stand out. So the biggest advice I have for you in attraction is to help them understand how to stand out. And we'll get more into that. So that's just a glimpse of what I suggest. The next is I want to talk about 51% reporting needing mental help this year. So that means Gen Z is feeling burned out and drained. So that means you really need to focus on that retention piece when you're looking at how to retain your Gen Z employees. 70 to 80% are active on LinkedIn. This is huge. Keep this in mind for attraction. 70 to 80% are very, very active on LinkedIn. So this is your #1 place to go to for attraction, and I'll dive deeper into that. And the last piece of data, 4+ hours are spent on social media. A day, not a week, a day. And this is not even on your phone, but just social media, which means you all need to be present as well in your recruitment strategy for Gen Z. So again, just some highlights here that are really important to know. The first part is attraction. I want to pause really quick and walk you through how I kind of create strategies for talent in my past roles and currently. What you really want to think about for recruitment is turn on that marketing mindset. For those of you that recruit marketers or have a marketing background, this is that funnel to move a customer from being aware of your brand into buying. So it's the same thing for your company in recruitment. If you are recruiting and trying to attract Gen Z the same way all the way through the funnel, it's not going to work. You actually need to have a different strategic level per funnel level, just as a marketer would. You're not going to put an ad for awareness the same way you would attract them at the bottom. So this, to me, take a screenshot of this. I'm giving you literally my strategy framework of how I build strategic initiatives in talent. The first level is awareness and branding you need to focus on as the attraction. This is all around employer branding, how you're standing out on the market, reputation. This tends to be a very large net that you put out in kind of the university or college space for Gen Z. Then it moves into how we attract and recruit. This gets more into the job descriptions and the way you're recruiting. I'll get into more details there. The next level is interview and candidate experience, super pertinent, and I'm going to talk more about this later on in the webinar. This is really what makes or breaks you bringing Gen Z over into your brand, is really that candidate experience. It's so important. And then lastly, that offer to retention is kind of that last little funnel piece that you want to focus on. So again, take this as a picture in your brain, or you'll get a recording of it. So the first piece is really talking about that attraction, that high level funnel. So what do we do? How do we attract Gen Z at that ultimate level? The first I want to talk through is job ads, job postings. This is really what you're putting out there on LinkedIn. But one thing I really want to emphasize here are a few key points in your job ads. You should definitely be using videos as much as you can. Gen Z is really attracted to any type of digital content. And so there's actual technologies that you can embed in your career site, or there's different landing pages I highly suggest using so that when Gen Z is looking and they're curious of your role, you need to use videos from you can use hiring managers to introduce themselves and say, hi, this is the role. We're really excited you apply. It could be 30 seconds long and that's it. Highly suggest you use that. We also at Her Campus Media use a lot of TikTok and social media, of course, to drive that engagement. Highly suggest using either one, don't overwhelm yourself with TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. Pick one and start there. But you really need to be present on these platforms to get Gen Z excited. This is just helping them learn about you. Make sure you're using inclusive language, very, very important. You also want to have an authentic approach in your job ads. I've seen an adjustment in going from a very formal job ad into kind of more fun language. And what that looks like is really more of a story, or let me tell you what you'll really be doing every day versus responsibilities. So that's another tip I have for you. Go back to those job descriptions and adjust from there. Also, Gen Z wants to know about your culture, your values, your mission. If this isn't on your job ad, you really are missing the mark, because Gen Z is going to see a role and say, okay, but what is this brand and what do they do? If you're a big brand, it still matters. So again, when I was at L'Oreal, we were all about our purpose work. And so again, we constantly talked about that. So just because you're a big brand does not mean you need to neglect your core and who you are. And then again, what content does really well with Gen Z is show a day in the life. So a lot of times it's going behind the scenes of sitting with one of your marketers or an engineer and say, this is actually what they're doing every day, and have them take their phones and show at their desk, whether it's remote or in person. So going to keep moving on here. The next level of attraction is where to advertise. As I said in the beginning, LinkedIn tends to be number one. However, we're seeing an increase in different job boards. In the US, we have Handshake. I think it's extending into London and the UK soon. But a lot of Gen Z are also going to startup boards. So this is also a global initiative. Different startups are, again, having kind of their own websites. So they're looking at that as well. They're going smaller, not always just to LinkedIn. Career sites tend to also be about number 3. So they're still coming to your brand website. Very, very important you keep this up to date. Social media, hands down, as I said, TikTok, Instagram, make sure you're showing up on there with your brand. Job fairs are decreasing a little bit here in the US in the sense of career fairs aren't always what they were. They're now more about awareness versus really converting. So just remember that you're not always going to hire a lot at a job fair. It's more of this is our brand. Also, Gen Z loves networking. They will reach out, and I know this because I've gotten so many messages in hiring recently. They will network. So don't forget that. Go to your business partners and see who has a network with Gen Z. This is really going to attract them to your company. The third piece on attraction is technology and automation is huge because recruitment experience is everything. 45% of Gen Z are worried about being ghosted by recruiters. And this, as a recruiter, being, having 10 years experience, this is the one thing that I just never want to do. You never want to ghost a candidate, but we've all been there where you've had 30 requisitions and you have hundreds of candidates and you just by chance forgot to respond to one. And guess what? That one person impacts many more than that one. So what I highly suggest using is a robust ATS to automate that communication, move multiple people through that workflow step so that it automates communication for you. This builds trust with Gen Z. There's another stat that Gen Z expects to hear from you within less than 4 weeks. Less than 4 weeks, which seems like a lot, but sometimes when you have one of those large roles that you have thousands or hundreds of candidates, you might not get to them for 5 weeks. Majority also are looking for a 2-week turnaround. 2 weeks they want to hear from you, which means if you're not moving ahead, use that automation to move them through and communicate with an authentic response. Gen Z really likes to maybe hear a little bit more than I'm just rejected. Give them a little more insight behind the scenes why they're not moving to an interview. And another thing too is in the recruitment experience, like I said, use videos. So there's video prep platforms that I highly suggest using. Again, it puts you as a recruiter in front to give 10 to 15 second, even 30-second tips on the recruitment phase. And this really helps Gen Z get their buy-in. They want to work for you now because they've seen that you are taking the time to convert them. The last thing I will say, if you have an ATS that also has a CRM functionality, use this for drip campaigns. So again, I really worked with a lot of marketers, so I put on my marketing hat. Drip campaigns are going to drip through like a 1 to 3 month period and even more. And why this is helpful for Gen Z is that, say, for instance, you had your internship open up and all these thousands of candidates are applying. Well, you don't hire 1,000 people. So can you take those 900 that weren't hired, move them into a drip campaign, and then continue the communication throughout the year so that they're still interested in, buying in. And then when they maybe graduate or the following year, they're coming back to you because you've been communicating with them. So huge tip there. I've seen this really work well to keep, Gen Z interested. And then the last, I'm going to go through this one. There's 4 parts of this section. These are key engagement steps to really generate buy-in at that attraction level. The first is your long-term strategy. So no more. The days of showing up once or twice at a university are gone and expecting that kind of conversion. You really need a long-term strategy beyond back to school. What this could look like, here's a few tips for you. You can start basically a partnership with a university over a year period and help give back to the students through curriculums and working with the professor. This gets your name really out there. Gen Z loves this because they love to see you at the university. The second tip I have for you is creating a community. We have a lot of these at Her Campus Media where we have communities at universities and we really build growth and community through that. And then all of those students, their sophomore years, junior year, are really interested in us because they've been part of our communities, getting career development in that networking in that community. So that's another example. And then the third example I have for you is create a hackathon or competition where they are kind of working on it for maybe a couple months. And then this could really help, again, put your brand out there. The next is shift to a marketing mindset. Just because you're a recruiter or HR does not mean you can't try marketing tactics. Meet with your marketing team, meet with your social media team and say, what is trending? What can we put out there? Can we partner together? Marketers, I'm telling you, if they have openings, they will love this. I used to love partnering with our marketing teams because they're the ones at the front and center, and they can kind of, again, combine with you to generate hiring strategies. So leverage TikTok, leverage LinkedIn. LinkedIn is huge, growing right now with again, different content out there of sharing. So really make sure that you are doing this to create buy-in. And then another tip I have for you from a marketing content is really even start an ambassador program. Do you have current hires that are Gen Z themselves that can go be ambassadors on the market and share, hey, I'm so excited. I just started at this company. Follow me along in my day-to-day. And that creates huge buying and attraction for Gen Z. Another is authentic approach. I talked about this in the beginning a bit. Again, if you are not showing behind the scenes and authentic stories, people are going to move on from your brand. If it's very sterile and seems so calculated, Gen Z sees right through it and they're like, yeah, I'm moving on to the next brand. So what you want to do is really lean into your values, your purpose, and your impact and share those true stories. The last, as I spoke to, is candidate experience. I really leaned into this in the prior slide, but again, do not lose sight of this. So once you attract and you're doing social, and again, maybe you're doing some type of competition or hackathon, do not forget about that. Follow up with your Gen Z candidates. They will not forget it. Okay, part two, we're on to retention. I'm gonna make sure because I haven't been able to see the chat and I'm trying to find it. So Michelle, let me know if I am missing anything. My chat thing kind of went away, but I trust that you'll weigh in if I'm missing any conversations that I need to see. Oh, here we go. Okay. Just want to make sure I'm not missing any questions. Okay, cool. So moving on, part two, retention. So again, whether you're on the recruitment side, some teams, I know I've worked on the talent acquisition side where retention is like, okay, well, now I'm hands off with it, but you really aren't. You're still very much involved, especially if you're on the business or an HR partner side. So what I want to kind of talk through is, what does Gen Z even look for? Because this is the thing, you cannot do it all. You cannot, at a brand, whether you're a small or big brand, you cannot offer everything under the sun. So really get clear on like your strengths as a company. Salary still tends to be number one factor for Gen Z. And the reason for this is because there's actual research that millennials, I'm a millennial, we way overspent in our time. We have too much debt. And so Gen Z looked at that and said, I don't want all that debt. I want to really minimize and not overspend and watch my own finances. So salary still tends to be number one for that security reason. So really make sure you're doing market analysis consistently. I would recommend, honestly, always looking at your probably at least twice a year at your compensation to really make sure that you are constantly moving the needle on where you need to be. In the US, we have pay transparency, so it makes things very transparent. We have to put on our job descriptions what we're paying. So Gen Z knows this and they're very aware. Work-life balance, work-life stability, whatever you want to call it, still tends to be number two. And why this is important is because it really goes with hand in hand with that burnout and mental health with Gen Z. So if you are seeing a big drop off after a year at your company, and this is where on the talent acquisition side, use data to link the two to understand, okay, if we're hiring this year, but we see a huge retention drop next year, what is happening in that 1 year? This is a big example of work-life balance. Growth potential is huge for learning. Another two things I want to call out, of course, are health benefits, time off, and then inclusion and diversity really matter. So again, constantly working with your DEI team to make sure what is your inclusion approach from an external standpoint and internal. Do not forget about what it is internally and why this is important, because as a recruiter, when you know What's happening on the internal side? Do you have affinity groups? Do you have other offerings from a DEI side? That helps make your job easier to really talk to that for Gen Z. Right now, I'm going to walk you through 3 different priorities as we look at retention. The first is you really want to listen to feedback before jumping into any strategies or changes. This is really important. So in HR right now, when I'm looking at, okay, what are we doing over the next 1 to 3 years to retain our employees? Instead of me throwing random ideas out there, I want feedback. Make sure your teams are doing either a pulse survey or some other type of feedback. You can do small focus groups. This is what helped me start some really great ideas when I was at L'Oreal. I ran focus groups, and getting even feedback from 20 to 50 people can really adjust where you're going. So if you're feeling a little lost in your strategy right now, just ask for feedback. Slow down, ask for feedback, see what your employees actually want. And Gen Z will tell you, they do not hold back. Number 2, growth potential is clear and not ambiguous. And what I mean by this is Gen Z does not want to be hired into a role that has absolutely no path. It doesn't mean you need a super specific one ahead for them, but you need to be able to tell them after this role, you actually have a possibility to move into a management role, or maybe there's another career path that you can try. In my discussions, interviewing with Gen Z, I constantly talk about this growth, and it gets people really excited to understand, oh, okay, so if I take this role, I'm not stuck for 5 years. Really, really important as a recruiter or even as business partner that you know what a path could look like. And then the third is leaning into purpose and meaning. And how you do this from the talent side is really, again, making sure that your retention is leaning into who you are as a company and creating meaning around that. What I mean by this is giving back to employees and helping them do passion projects or connect with affinity groups. Gen Z loves this. I lead our DEI advisory council here at Her Campus Media, and what that is we basically have employees part of literally a committee, and they are weighing in on the changes. It's giving them purpose. It's giving them meaning to work toward beyond their day-to-day. So 3 is really important if you want to retain Gen Z, because if you're only bringing Gen Z in, expecting them to work all the time, and then giving them no opportunities of kind of tapping into more, they're going to be burned out very soon. So you really need to fill up their cup a little bit with some joy and energy. This is one of my favorite, these 2 examples, please take these from me. These I've done in my past from a strategy standpoint. So Gen Z are amazing advocates for your business. If you come from a small or big brand, you don't always have to use ads or huge campaigns out there to get your name out there. You can literally just look at the people you've hired and say, ooh, these 5 people have been doing really well. Let's create advocates, for them. So what you can do is any of your Gen Z hires that you've had in the last like 1-2 years, bring them into different programs. One of them you could do is an alumni program. This is where they go back to their campuses or universities, wherever they might have gone, and really speak to the students. They are also building the relationships to help you as a talent leader. So this is really, really helpful. Alumni can really scale your awareness. It can scale your ability to reach new students and students that you might have never thought you would be able to meet because of alumni. So this again gives Gen Z that purpose, and it keeps them retained. I know from past experience that any Gen Z hired into an alumni program loved it so much, and they really, really took off and became kind of a recruiter themselves. The second is social media. And why this is important is because we on the HR and talent side don't always feel comfortable being on social media. A lot of people in Gen Z, especially if they're digital or marketers, they love it. So I highly suggest, if you really want to retain Gen Z, go to them and say, hey, can you help make content for recruitment? Can you help make content for, an event? Give them a purpose and something beyond their day-to-day. And honestly, they can make videos like in 10 seconds over what would take me probably 3 hours sometimes, where I'm like overthinking and I'm like, what hashtag do I use? It's so great to have them. So please utilize your hires for this. Okay, so we're getting into the last 2 minutes. I want to go through some key takeaways, and then I want to open it up to any Q&A questions. So please get those ready for me so I can be able to answer and go back to any slides or data that you want. The first is with Gen Z, your takeaways for recruiting and retaining. Really create an authentic strategy around your business. I'm going to give you a hint right now. If you are not starting backwards, then you're doing it wrong. And what that means is you need to start with the gaps of your business and then build a strategy from there. If you are just taking everything I told you today and kind of throwing it against the wall and trying it out without a purpose around an actual business need, you're going to feel very overwhelmed. So I'll give you an example. When you look at the biggest gaps in your business, it could be that, why do we have so much turnover in sales? Or, gosh, we have so many openings on the digital marketing side and I can't keep up. Really talk with your business leaders. Where are they going to see in the next 1 to 3 years? I'll give you an example. This was a huge gap of data science for me and my background. And so based on the data science and digital gap, I went backwards and said, okay, what are the schools that support? Let's make content around that. Let's make partnerships around that. And then it leads to your gap. So please be doing this. And if you're not, just try it out next year because it really does work. Be adaptable. What works this year, what I'm telling you today is not going to be the same next year because Gen Z is always changing. So please stay up to date on research and surveys. We at Her Campus Media, I'm really lucky because we have a research team that is phenomenal and they are running research and Genzology reports, which is fabulous. So if anybody wants to talk more about that, let me know. I love research because it's going to help guide you in your purpose and your why versus just creating strategy. So please make sure that any strategic initiative comes from kind of that survey basis so you're not feeling lost. And then the next is, again, always come back to your why and your company mission. Do not forget this. And this is so important because, again, authenticity really shows through and Gen Z knows it. Like if you are not showing up authentically, they're going to go on to the next brand. So I want to pause. We're right at 11:30 for me on the East Coast, but I think, earlier, later for some of you. I would love to get a discussion and go back through. Oh yeah, let me see. Okay, so I'll go back to Brianna. Which slide did you want? This one? This one? Okay. Let me know if you want any other slides to go back to as takeaways. And then I see another question on what are Gen Z thoughts on rotational type programs? Absolutely. This is a great question. Are those a differentiator and a value to them? Absolutely. So one of the question is thoughts on rotational type programs. Rotational programs are really great because you give Gen Z the ability to move around different parts of the business. However, you do have to have the capacity to run those. So for a smaller business, might not be ideal, but you can always start a small fellowship or again, like a small program, and it gives those individuals that ability. The one thing I'll say about rotational programs though, make sure that you have a clear ending of what they could potentially land on after that rotation. This is something that from my background was a bit of a struggle sometimes because Gen Z also wants to know what they're going to be doing next and they want clarity. So if you have a rotational program with 3 different areas of the business, let's say they move into sales, they move into a marketing role, and then they move into a digital role. Let's say that's their rotation. Afterwards, they really want to know, like, okay, well, where am I potentially landing? And if you can't necessarily show them that, it kind of makes it a tough sell sometimes because I've gotten feedback around, well, I don't want the sales rotation. I want the other rotation, right? So just be clear on showing them that these are the potential pathways. This is kind of the time frame and all of that. Otherwise, they do work, but you have to really be very thorough with them and be very transparent. If you're leaving out, again, some of their pathing, Gen Z is going to want to know, like, why would I take this? And then you might see an increase in declines on a rotation program because Gen Z actually wants just that one role. And I've gotten feedback on this, like, well, I just actually want the one role. I don't want three. So hopefully that helps you, Taylor. Again, could talk much more offline about that one, but it's definitely valuable. You just have to program it really well. Any other
I've actually collated some, so I'm really happy to kind of run through some of those.
oh yeah, perfect.
So please do so keep submitting as we're going through. But there was one on the kind of breadth of Gen Z, which now kind of covers people in management roles through to kind of graduates. Do you think there's any differences like in this approach based on whether or not they're currently in the workforce or quite a few years in?
Can you clarify the question about, are you saying if they're in like a management program?
No, so just the age gap of Gen Z is because
Yeah.
so 1997, I believe,
Yeah.
which puts people around so 27 through to people who are 18, 19,
Right.
20. It's quite a big gap. So do you think there's any core differences, or are there any that people so should consider?
I mean, it's a really good call out. You can get very granular when it comes to data on separating than Gen Z, because then you have more of the Gen Alpha, which is like closer to that 18. And then you have the Gen Z, which is like that core, which tends to be like that 21, 27 range. So yes, of course, there's going to be differences because you have some Gen Z in the workforce now, and they're getting out there and they're getting professional experience. So they're um kind of like what they're looking for might be different than those that are kind of at the 18, 19 level. So that's what I mean by it's going to change year after year. What works for Gen Z now isn't going to always work, especially in the next 2 to 3 years. It's going to start kind of adjusting into this alpha, which is the next, generation group. So yeah, I would say you can't replicate and say, oh, just because this data point is stated, then that's replicated for all different levels. So to your point, Michelle, this is why it's so important to have different like strategic strategies for your different programs. For instance, internship is going to be a different recruitment than your entry level early careers. And I can go more into that. But again, it's going to be a different recruitment process, but you kind of have the same foundational like needs.
Brilliant, thank you. There was just another one. So you kind of spoke about so D&I, and I guess
Mhm.
like broadly social good and the importance of that. What if someone doesn't have a clear ESG strategy right now? Like, is there anything else so that you can leverage that would be as impactful?
Yeah. So I mean, not everyone has robust, especially depending on what company you're at. Not everybody might have a robust DEI or inclusion, or other strategies. So I would say again, everything I gave today are all these large suggestions and lean into one area. So if you feel like you don't have a strong enough strategy in one space, go back to your core as a company. I always say just start with your values and mission. This, like, it honestly really connects with Gen Z when they hear from you about what you've done to make an impact. So do you all do volunteer work, right? Do you give back to certain donations? Do you give people time off to volunteer? Anything around impact and purpose seems to be doing well, and that doesn't require a strategy, right? It's kind of like your low hanging fruit that every company has a mission and value. So start with that. If you don't have the other things kind of ready to go, that's okay. Just come back to your core and build your brand around that first versus jumping ahead.
Brilliant, thank you.
Yeah. I see a
And
few other questions in the chat.
brilliant. Do you want to go through those?
Yeah. The one question from Mike, have you seen a data on drop-off rates if postings don't include salary or real-time survey? I would love real-time survey feedback, but I will say the one thing is, so in the US, we do have to post and put pay transparency. So I'm trying to think of if there's postings that don't include it, they're gonna like Gen Z is gonna ask right away and be curious. I do think that there's definitely an increase once you do add it of like the transparency around what you're actually paying. However, still have that discussion as a talent leader. So I will tell you, even if I put a pay transparency that it's from this range to this range, Gen Z is going to want to push the level and say, I want the highest range or I want above that. So it's kind of a sticky situation in the sense of like you're sharing the salary, but they still, kind of might push the limits. So I would say, yeah, I have seen drop off rates when we weren't including it. And then when you start to include it, and now it's on every single job description. I mean, we have hundreds and hundreds of applicants. So I do think it helps. Another question is, do you have specific examples, ideas on how you can leverage your ATS better to engage those candidates? Yes. So I'll actually go back to, I could always go back to that slide a little bit. Like this funnel, I think could be helpful for you. So when you're thinking of your ATS, again, it depends on your ATS, but you really want to, here's a few different things that you could do through each level. The first of awareness in an ATS, a really good ATS is going to let you, again, like post video to your career site, or again, create really good branding. So make sure your career site is up to date because that's going to impact, the connection of your ATS. So then another thing with your ATS is you can use different workflow steps and automations to communicate back to candidates. And I highly suggest doing this so that you don't get behind. I know, again, being a fully remote company, we get a lot of applicants. And whether you get 20 applications or 200, you really don't want to fall behind. So using your ATS to move people through those workflows, send out a mass communication, but make that mass communication authentic. Don't just say like you haven't been picked to move forward. What I always share is, hey, thank you for your application. We had 200 applicants this year. Wow, this was a very high number. We just want to let you know you do have really good talent, but at this time, we didn't pick your application to move ahead, but please keep an eye on our career site and like keep them engaged in your brand somehow. I know people that have linked them back to their LinkedIn or TikTok page or something. So that's another thing on the ATS that I would use. So again, like the workflow stuff. And then the third piece on your ATS, if you have forms are really helpful because people are filling out information and it helps them feel like, okay, I'm sharing something about my background and it's going to help you get back to them with more specifics. So what I mean by that is you might be able to ask more specifically on the job and kind of weed people out that way, but then also have specific data on them. And I'll give you an example on this. So for interns, right? If you have thousands of intern applications, a form is going to help you understand, hey, what's your background? How many years or what year are you in school? And do you have these skills? And it's amazing to see that some of the candidates fit that and the others that don't. It doesn't mean that you don't follow up with them. It means that, hey, let's keep these candidates because they actually have an engineering background. So let's move them into another bucket and have them apply to a different job. That's how I would use my ATS. It really automate those systems and really think like, how do you keep staying in touch with them? And then, yeah, Mike, good point. Like, in the US, it isn't a legal requirement in every state to do the job transparency. A fully remote company, we have to. But again, depending on the state you're in, I would suggest at least starting with some type of range. But again, it's a whole different level in the US with pay transparency. If you don't need to, a lot of companies don't want to put it. So I would say it's going to help also like just have you stand out as a transparent company versus, you might set up dozens of interviews and then realize like, oh, everyone's out of pay. So I would suggest trying it out. Any other question? These were great questions.
There was just one
Mhm.
earlier on Gen Z burnout. So just your thoughts on like how best to balance that, especially
Yeah,
with busy periods, or if it is just a busy kind of fast-paced business or role. What are
no,
your
100%. Yeah, so like in my role now, this is a huge part of what I do. Half of our workforce is Gen Z, and what I do is around people culture and retention. So my approach is that again, starting with the feedback of what does Gen Z want and understanding what's going to help them feel re-energized. So sometimes it's different learning workshops that are around, mental health or boundaries. Other times it's a day off. We give everyone a mental health day in May. I know this has been a huge trend in the US to start giving people just a day off so that they don't feel the pressure. Like a lot of companies might say, oh, take a day off. But if you give a day off to Gen Z, they really appreciate it. Another thing around Gen Z retention is again like helping that burnout with helping them kind of tap into like these small passion projects really, really help. And it could be something very small. It could be a volunteer day. Um, Gen Z really likes it because what it does is if you're working just nonstop, it's only natural that your energy needs to be refilled in some capacity. So as HR or talent, you really need to think like, how can I help my workforce feel re-energized? And that is our role to make sure that we are retaining and not burning out our employees because it happens. It happens a lot more if you're just expecting work output without the balance of it. So really make sure you're saying, okay, if we're, in a really busy time for our employees, we all have those ups and downs, that we're going to give them a time off after or something to refill because it's a lot of energy to work nonstop.
I guess so this kind of ties in so to another question, just around like what Gen Z or what you think Gen Z expects from their leaders and their managers. Just your thoughts on that.
Yeah, transparency, like number one. They want to know how decisions are made and why decisions are made. And I think those are kind of the two key things. And if your leaders aren't sharing business results, if your leaders aren't showing up and actually communicating to your population, this is a big miss. So I would really suggest that whatever kind of company you're at, whether again, I've worked at companies that are 85,000 and now, under 100, it's always that the leaders need to show up and share communication about the company and the state of the business from themselves and not necessarily going through others. So that's the biggest tip I have.
Brilliant. Mindful of time, there was just one more question.
Okay.
Of flexible working and like what role you think that plays in kind of work-life balance. Do you need it? Like, is that a really core factor
Yeah.
impacting Gen Z?
So yeah, and actually one of the statistics like I look at all the time is the difference between Gen Z actually favors hybrid, by the way. So if they have a choice between hybrid, remote, or fully in office, they want hybrid because they do like that connection. So there's real value in that connection piece, but also the ability to work from home. So they really love flexibility. If you are one or the other, make sure you somehow meet in the middle. So we're fully remote. We then have to do more things to connect our employees to bring them together. If you're fully in office, make sure you're somehow giving them an option to like have a flexible day to work from home or something. So yeah, hybrid is number one. I think because it's a balance, right? It's giving you the energy of connection, but it's also giving you the ability to be at home.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
It's super insightful. And we've already had some great feedback in the chat with so many brilliant takeaways. Just to finish up, we will send a follow-up email shortly with a link so to watch the video on demand. If you have missed anything, you can revisit it via that link. And finally, if you are working in-house and you're not yet a member of the Hire community, please do go to hirehq.com and sign up for webinars like this and plenty of others. So just to say thank you to all of you who attended. And again, thank you so much, Brittany.
Mm,
And have a wonderful rest of your week, everyone.
yeah. Thank you all.
Thank you.